Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now then, if Labour MPs are worried about the future of their party when they mounted their coup against Jeremy Corbyn this summer, things could be about to get a lot worse for them next week. On Tuesday, an independent review of parliamentary boundaries will publish their initial proposals aimed at reducing the number of MPs from 650 to 600. And it's thought those cuts could disproportionately affect Labour, with up to 30 of their seats disappearing altogether. Well, Lord Hayward is a Conservative peer and a key architect of the party's boundary analysis. And joining me from Cardiff is Labour's Shadow Minister, John Ashworth. And a very good morning to you both. I want to start with you, Lord Hayward. And you have to prove to people, not just in the Labour Party, that this is about fairness overall to all voters, not just about gerrymandering the boundaries against your opponents.
This is a system that's been in operation for a century, both at local government level and national level. And what we are operating to is a tighter quota than previously, but it is fairness across the country so that all parliamentary constituencies will be broadly the same size.
Just explain the numbers and how it's been done.
What happens is that populations shift over time. Some counties grow, some counties lose population. The boundary commissions have been asked to operate within a quota broadly of 71,000 voters to 78,000, and that all MPs should represent constituencies of roughly that size. At the moment, you have MPs who represent constituencies of 40,000 and other MPs who represent constituencies with 90,000 voters. So a vote in one constituency doesn't have the same value as one in another.
We'll hold that there and just let me on that bring in then John Ashworth. So it is entirely about the numbers and addressing unfairnesses that are developed over time within our system.
Well, if that was the case, then it would be a reasonable approach. But it's not the case, is it? As Lord Hayward admitted a couple of weeks ago, this is about reducing the number of Labour MPs at the next general election. But more importantly than that, we're proceeding with a boundary redistribution where something in the region of 2 million people have not been counted in these numbers. Because ahead of the Brexit referendum, 2 million people got themselves onto the register. And they're not being part of the count that is being used to draw up these new boundaries. So people are disenfranchised, and if Lord Hayward was correct about, well, this is all being very reasonable, why on earth is he proceeding with cutting, or why is his party proceeding with cutting the numbers of MPs by 50?
All right, well, that 2 million is a very valid point I'm going to put to Lord Hayward in a minute, but staying with you, John Ashworth, the overall ambition to make one person's vote of the same weight and value wherever they vote within the United Kingdom, surely that is a valid operation.
That is a reasonable approach, and obviously, if that was the case, that was something that we would want to look at carefully. But this is about reducing the number of MPs by 50 in order to apparently save money on the cost of politics. Of course, 260 people have been appointed to the unelected House of Lords, including Lord Hayward, of course, by David Cameron. David Cameron, when he resigned a few weeks ago, did his sort of resignation lavender list. He blew 12 million in taxpayers' money on it. That's exactly the same amount that the government are talking about saving by cutting the number of MPs.
Argue about that then, can you, Lord Hayward? Sorry to cut across you, John Ashworth, but you can't argue about that, can you? I mean, there's too many in the House of Lords, aren't there? You amongst them. I
actually said in a debate the other day that I supported a reduction in the House of Lords. I've made absolutely clear that is the right thing to do. And as far as I'm concerned, if there is a cull of members of the House of Lords on a good trade union principle of last in, first out, and I go, so be it.
What about these 2 million? John Ashworth is absolutely right. Because of the nature, perhaps, of the referendum, lots of people wanted to have a say. They then registered to vote, and they're not part of this redistribution.
You have to choose a date from which you actually do the enumeration.
But you want to get it
right. Registration is an ongoing basis. This process of review is going to take 2 years to complete. So do we stop and start again in 2017 or 2018 or whatever? And the Labour Party made the same point in 2011 and 2010. So there has to be a set date. It was a set date, and we'll review the next period 5 years on from now.
That's an awful long time. I mean, can't you just be sensible and say, well, we can pause. we've got everything in place here. Now we can just count up. They're on the electoral register now. They're easy to count.
The review operates, and it takes 2 years in terms of hearings. People have the right to make their representations. And in fact, there are places, if you took the 2 million, and I'm not saying you should, but there are places like Manchester that would actually lose out as a result of using the more recent numbers.
OK, well, let me ask John Ashworth, is that a good enough explanation for you then, that it will be reviewed in due course and you have to draw the line somewhere?
Well, Lord Hayward has just said it will take 2 years. Well, as far as I'm aware, we're three and a bit years away from a general election, unless Lord Hayward's going to confirm that Theresa May is going to go to the country before 2020. The point is, though, there's been two big changes since this legislation went through. The first is something called individual voter registration, which is a different way of getting on the register. All the experts said, delay this review for a year so we can make sure we've got everybody on the register. So the government are ignoring all the experts, as Lord Hayward knows. And secondly, we've had the Brexit referendum. Regardless of the rights or wrongs of that is the result that we're leaving Europe, which means we're losing 73 European members of Parliament. And given that we're taking back control, presumably there's going to be a greater legislative responsibility on UK members of Parliament. So I think the suggestion to cut, or the idea that we have to cut the UK Parliament by 50, needs to be reviewed and looked at again in light of the fact that we're losing 73 European members of Parliament.
That's interesting. Lord Hayward, thoughts on that?
It's a fascinating argument. We're now going on to the question of 650 or 600. When I was originally in the House of Commons, there was no Scottish Parliament, no Welsh Assembly, no Ulster Assembly, no Greater London Authority. We have far more paid politicians now, including the House of Lords, than we had 20 years ago, when we were actually dealing with all the legislation that's been dealt with in Brussels. John Ashworth is arguing, well, let's not do anything. Our system, we are over-governed as a country. One minute he says, let's not reduce the numbers. The next minute he says the numbers are wrong. He's got to decide where he puts his position.
Yeah, I mean, is 650 too many or too few, John Ashworth? I mean, you were now saying with the British, the UK leaving the European Parliament, we might need more MPs.
Well, I think 650 is the right number. And my argument is, now that we're losing 73 MEPs, which will mean that there's more responsibility in MPs, I think going down to 600 is the wrong approach. I think we should stick at 650.
Should they be on fair constituencies of equal size between 71,000 and 78,000?
Last thought on this. I know what you're going to say, John Ashworth. Are they fair constituencies?
Well, I think we should look at the size of constituencies, of course. But one of the issues about the way the boundary of the Commission look at these things at the moment is it's purely about that number. They don't look at things like natural communities anymore. They don't look at things like natural historic parish areas. All that needs to be brought back. But of course we want constituencies to be of reasonable, similar and equal size, of course. But we do have to be flexible and recognise that some areas don't want to be split up.
Sorry to cut you off there, but we're inflexible about our off-air time. I'm sure we'll be discussing this a lot more during the course of the week. John Ashworth, thank you very much indeed for your time. Lord Hayward, very good to see you.